that we are live and broadcast. All right. Just confirming, and I'm going to send you the link, Robbie. So if you go to Global Exchange's Facebook page, you're going to see it there, Robbie, and you can just pull it from there.
I'm doing that now. I'm
Perfect.
muting myself, but doing that.
Perfect. And we're live. Okay, perfect. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. During the 80s and under a Western vision of progress, the world embarked in an economic and political project with the intention of integrating economies and legal frames to create common markets under the concept of globalization. As a consequence, the world became smaller for some people, and millions of individuals across the globe were pushed out from their local communities and economies, and Western countries started pulling and attracting workers from across the world to their cities that became richer. Very quickly, after 2 decades of globalization, the world today is far from integrated or better. Goods and money are traveling freely, while workers and families are facing unprecedented risks and violence. Governments have put in place some of the harshest anti-immigrant laws in history, and sectors of society are growing an anti-immigrant sentiment, while violence is growing in communities of origin. Today, in the spirit of International Workers' Day, and at a time when an international health crisis is rewriting the relationship between labor and capital, we want to hold this open forum on support for international workers that we also known as immigrants. I want to welcome an amazing group of panelists that today will be speaking with us. Let me start with Alma. Alma, welcome. Alma Makitico is the co-director of the National Network for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, a national organization of local coalitions and immigrant, refugee, community, religious, civil rights, and labor organizations and activists. It's a pleasure to have you here. Also, let me welcome Ravi Rakbir. Ravi is the executive director of the New Century Coalition, which is a multi-faith immigrant-led organization that creates support systems for and empowers those navigating the immigration system. And finally, Alex Mensim, welcome. He is the project coordinator with Pueblos Sin Fronteras and all-volunteer transnational collective in solidarity with displaced people. He is based currently in the Tijuana, San Diego region. So let me start by asking you, what are the realities that immigrant families are facing these days? Can we start with you, Alma, please?
Yes, hi, thank you very much for having me. It's a great honor to be in this space with each one of you. And it's a great honor to be able to speak to different communities, to various communities around the country, in the spirit of International Workers' Day. So our commitments and solidarities are to all of those workers who are currently keeping us alive, and to all of those workers and families who are crossing borders and who are, living a terrible nightmare. And we hope to continue working to dismantle those systems of injustices that migrant communities are facing as we speak. So yes, I think that as you mentioned in your introduction, migrant communities and poor people around the world, we have been experiencing multiple systems of injustices and discrimination. Many of us who come from villages have been suffering the exploitative model that's been advanced by industrial agriculture or by the industrialized system and exploitative system of production that has pushed us out of our villages, our home countries, and having to migrate to cities or to having to, or resorting to migrating internationally in search of a little bit of protection, in search of trying to be and reunify ourselves with our families who have often haven't had to migrate north in order to continue helping us in our home countries. So right now, with the current with the global pandemic, most of these crises that we have been experiencing historically are being exacerbated and accelerated, you know, with governments that were not protecting us before in this big global health crisis. These governments do not have the systems and oftentimes do not have us and do not have our rights and our lives and our dignity as a priority in their political and economic and even health agendas.
Thank you very much for that amazing perspective. Many people might wonder why, if the Trump administration has been so harsh on immigrants, they continue coming and trying to get to the US. These conditions have not changed. The conditions in our countries of origin, as you say, Alma, are continuing to be worse and worse every time. Let me just ask now to Ravi and Alex, in with this pandemic, what are the realities now that immigrant families and immigrant workers are facing on immigration while they are right now in immigration detention? Please, Alex.
Hi there, Marco, and hello, everybody. Thanks again for tuning in, especially on May 1st. One of the things, so Pueblos Sin Fronteras has been in touch with a lot of people, especially detained in Otay Mesa Detention Center, which is a for-profit private prison for immigrants run by ICE and also by the U.S. Marshals here in the outskirts of San Diego, California. And so we've been speaking with people more and more since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and things have really only gotten worse there. To begin with, ICE detention is extremely, extremely hard on a family. It's torture. There's no medical care. The food is poor. People are held there arbitrarily. So all of these things that were already at the level of disaster, and people were already calling for ICE detention centers to be shut down with this pandemic, have gotten even worse. So one of the things that I think has been particularly hard on families, aside from the lack of hygiene and medical care and whatnot, something that we might not often think about is the cost of being in immigrant detention. So there are people who are in Otay Mesa Detention Center. I was speaking to somebody recently who needs evidence from his home country because he's got his final hearing coming up. Detained immigration hearings have not been postponed, many of them. And so he needs commissary money to be able to eat, because right now, with the lack of staff, because a lot of the private prison guards are leaving the job because they don't have the protective equipment that they need to protect themselves from COVID-19, or they've gotten sick. So with the lack of staff, they have only been able to eat sandwiches. It's just one sandwich 3 times a day. And so they can't, without commissary, he can't buy any other food in the commissary. He can't make phone calls if he doesn't have money. He can't pay for other people to translate or go get, his family can't pay for an attorney, his family can't. And so all of the family members that he has outside have lost their income due to COVID-19 because they're working families. And so when it's already difficult to support somebody with the astronomical cost of bonds, $10, $15, $30, $45,000 bonds to get somebody out of immigration detention, and the cost of an attorney, now it's even harder for immigrant families to support their family members who are in immigrant detention, not to mention the stress of the possibility of being infected with COVID-19. In Otay Mesa, where there's over 600 people detained, there's already at least 150 positive COVID-19 cases. So we're talking about a quarter of the entire population. And that's only the ones who ICE has actually tested. So things are really hard on families right now. And for the people who inside immigrant detention are standing up and organizing to fight back and going on hunger strike, the guards and ICE are retaliating against them, taunting them with food, telling them that they're never going to get out, putting them in isolation, pepper spraying them, handcuffing them, all of these kinds of things that under COVID-19 put people at even greater risk. So it's been really hard to hear everybody and to hear their family members, mothers who just want to see their son one more time before they die from COVID-19 in a detention center has been really, really tough.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. We want to welcome everyone who's watching us here on Zoom, and we want to welcome everyone who's watching us on Facebook. We are holding a special Mayday Webcast speaking about international migrants and international workers and their families across and the fight for their rights across the globe. Ravi, please tell us what are families that you're working with going through right now, and why is it a different moment from what they were already experiencing? You are on mute. Yeah.
So I could repeat the same thing that Alex said and Alma said. I'm not, because they hit on the on the problems, how bad it is in detention, how bad it was then, and how bad it is now. But I will want to say, on a pessimistic perspective, they were saying 70% of the people in detention will get COVID. 70%. That's a pessimistic count, right? That's an optimistic count. A pessimistic count is 100%. So everyone in detention is going to get COVID-19. Now, if you don't have testing and you don't have treatment, imagine we don't have treatment on the outside here. Can you think that they are going to give treatment inside a detention center for immigrants who they don't care about? This administration hates immigrants, hates brown and black people, hates us, and you see, because he himself is a racist and a nationalist. So anything to do that could cause us harm and cause us to be afraid, his administration wants to create. Now, I want to step back about the 96 and the 86 immigration laws. You remember those were created with the intent that the more people die, the less likely they will come to the United States. So right now we're in a pandemic, and the pandemic talks about people dying. If people die in detention, the message that this administration will expect is don't come here anymore. So it is deliberate that they are continuing to hold people in detention. Remember, this is a civil process. It's not, you had Roger Stone and Michael Avenatti being released and other people being released, yet on immigration, it's a civil process. We are political prisoners in those detention centers. Over 30,000 people are in detention. What is more insidious is that they are moving people around in these detention centers so that they hope and they expect that they will spread the viruses among the detainees. So what is families are facing? They are facing the inevitable death. I may survive, but I do not know if I will survive. So everyone is expecting to be killed during this process. They don't want to die in detention. They don't want to see their loved one die in detention. So everyone is fighting. And fortunately for us, you, Marco, Alex, Alma, all of us, we have put aside everything in our advocacy and focus on freeing them all. Our goal is to free them all. And because we cannot see 30,000 people dying, 30,000 families being disrupted. And I want to come back to what Alma ended with, which is dignity. People move here to find some form of dignity in the process, in this globalization that they have created and are using to harm control our communities. I'm going to stop here, Marco, because I know you have a lot of questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravi. It is true. This is a humanitarian crisis, and this could not be more unfair than what we are facing right now. Alma, please tell us uh, how are families in the border? What's the reality at the border for binational families, for immigrant workers at the border? What are they experiencing right now?
Well, we are experiencing a compounding humanitarian crisis. Um, and this is a crisis that is man-made, and this is a crisis that was not created by this administration. It actually began with the criminalization of migrants under also democratic, administrations. So both Republicans and Democrats have been uh, ignoring the human rights crisis that we have been experiencing on the border. And oftentimes, when discussions on immigration reform have come to the conversation, it's always the border, like let's secure the border um, uh, in order to pass some type of immigration reform. But what securing the border means for us, border communities, it means that there's continuous militarization and continuous development of this military infrastructure that is really meant to keep our families apart and to discriminate against those families who are escaping violence and economic inequalities in their home countries or that are experiencing displacement. Um, when the administration passed the MPP program, the Remaining Mexico program or migrant protection protocols, that really triggered a great number of people to be able to stay in Mexico and not being able to present their asylum claims as they traditionally did it on the border. And it, it was this policy was is actually a violation of international law, and it's a violation of national refugee refugee laws as well. And so what that created was a lot of pressure on local shelters on the US, on the Mexican side, and push a lot of organizations to try to figure out how to gather the resources to buy food, to buy cleaning supplies, to expand, their capacity so that they could be able to accommodate, now this immigrant surge, that they were experiencing. That also created a lot of uh, homelessness in many ways. It put a lot of communities, it pressured them to create some camps in which they were exposed to heightened risk, because as we know, Mexico has experienced a terrible period of violence. So not only migrant communities and asylum seekers and elders and children were risking their lives trying to cross borders, but also now they were exposed to even more dangerous conditions when they arrived to the US-Mexico border. So it has created a lot of pressures, specifically on the Mexican side, and it's created also a lot of questions in terms of what can we do as civil society, as nonprofit organizations, non-governmental organizations, what can we do to support those communities that are in crisis, and to also a lot of individuals to try to figure out how they can contribute individually by cooking food, by donating clothes, by volunteering to staff the shelters, just because there's very few resources coming to the humanitarian organizations and the human rights organizations that are confronting the crisis. So I'll stop there, and then we can come back a little bit to deepen a little bit more about the conditions here.
We want to hear about more about the work that you're doing and that letter that it's been being shared. Richard Lewis from the public, thank you, Richard, for your question, is asking you, what does exist at the border that shares your own aim to serve those on both sides of the border? And also, if you want to speak into your own experience to value and involve students in higher education institutions in your work. So probably any one of you that wants to respond to that question. Alex, I see Alma looking at you.
Well, so yeah, we've seen there's been a lot of struggle here in like the Tijuana, San Diego area. A lot of the shelters, just like Alma was saying, were already at the limit with MPP people, people who had asked for asylum and been sent back to Mexico, and now in many cases had nowhere to go. The Mexican government doesn't always give them the proper documentation to be able to work. And now with COVID-19, a lot of those shelters, at least in Tijuana, have actually closed their doors to new incoming people, and it's created an even larger pressure. There are some efforts locally to, at the very least, distribute care packages or support packages of like groceries. Pueblos Sin Fronteras, some of our members here locally have gone and distributed packages of groceries to families who have organized to support caravan members here, migrant families who are organizing migrants here in Tijuana. Another organization locally, Al Otro Lado, has been gathering, oftentimes inviting people actually in the United States to donate, if they can, their stimulus checks to be able to go towards care packages for MPP victims in Tijuana. So there are some efforts to try to provide emergency support. And I would encourage people to, if you're close to a border region, to look for the local organizations. Many of those organizations, just reach out to them. They're not hard to find if you look. And if you're not near the border, I mean, we all want to support the places that we're at, but also, there are organizations supporting undocumented people in communities all over the United States. And so you don't have to necessarily look to another place that's far from where you're at. I would look for the organizations locally. A lot of people are putting up good lists. Cosecha the Cosecha movement has put up lists of some of the places where you can donate to undocumented people. I'm sure Ravi and Alma and Marco can share others. We try to involve people in as many ways as possible. And during the era of the time of COVID-19, Pueblos Sin Fronteras and other organizations are looking for ways to involve people in car rallies and digital actions and things like that.
Thanks, Alex. Let me just go up north to New York, Ravi, and ask the uncomfortable question. Now that we're facing this pandemic, the usual response under the traditional American culture, it's take all your resources and try to share as much as possible. But there is another crisis, which is crisis, the one that you've already spoken about, which is the existing injustice, criminalization, and the tension of workers and families. So it's two crises that right now are mixed. How are organizations and communities in New York addressing one or the other? Are we getting confused just by sending lots of food to lots of folks and not looking into the real injustice? Or are we working on the structural side? What is the state doing? How are we pushing the state, the city to act not only with humanitarian relief, but with structural change? What's your experience?
Thank you, Marco. We have to, the reality is that this pandemic has created a lot of problems for those of our community. If you're the fortunate few who have a middle class and can work from home, so you see the inequities already. If you can work from home, you can still be gainfully employed and still have a roof over your head and food, and etc. Most of our communities are not in that situation. In fact, they call us the essential workers, right? we are the delivery people, we are the restaurant, we cooking, we are in the grocery, etc. And in New York City, people still have to travel to and from their work, providing support for the largest city itself. And not only in New York City, everywhere across the country. In fact, farm workers are an example of a major example of an essential worker. This administration has said they want to keep the meat packing plant open, right, as an essential business. Yet, who is in that business is us. I use us as not me, but the immigrant community as doing the work, and who are not given the proper protective gear, having to do that work, and will face the possibility of getting the virus and not getting access to the resources, medical and etc., so that they will probably be in a very dire situation. We are basically the disposable, and it is hard. It is not hard to understand why we are disposable, because we have had, I hate to bring this up, but your president, right, AMLO, he's a progressive president, right? Yet what he done, he's allowed the U.S. government to dictate that MPP is going to be working, so that they will accept MPP. How crazy is that? So what does our progressive community really mean when we can still target the disposable people like immigrants who are who are just trying to live in dignity? What does the state do? Well, fortunately, New York City has responded very well. They were able to provide food banks, so people can get meals 3 times a day. They are even providing money, or short-term money from Open Societies Foundation to help people with that. But that is not enough, because $500 doesn't go anywhere, not in this city. So what we will have to do is we have to think about a larger way that we can deal with this crisis, but on a larger crisis of why are we not getting access to the stimulus money? And
Ravi, let me take a
yes.
question from the public, just to extend on what you're saying. What is MPP? Can you explain?
I can, but I prefer Alma and Alex to address that, because they are working at the border. But it's migrant protection protocol, where they send people who are here looking for asylum, send them back to Mexico. But I prefer Alex and Alma to answer that, so I pass it back to you guys.
Thank you very much. Anybody wants to extend a little bit more on what's MPP, please? Oh, Alma, yeah. Alex. You, Alma, I'm sorry. Alex says there you go. No. Alma, please. Alma, please help us understanding a little bit more on what MPP is.
Well, I really need a lawyery response from Alex, but the migrant protection protocols are nothing about protection of people. It was a program that was really designed to deter migrants and asylum seekers and people with a claim, and claim with facing persecution, to deter them from coming into the United States. And that created, as Ravi mentioned, that created a tremendous humanitarian crisis.
We're having problems with Alma. Her internet froze. But Alex, do you want to extend something on what you were saying, please?
Sure, yeah. I can provide more paralegally response, since I'm not a lawyer, but yeah, migrant protection protocols was put into place at the beginning around the beginning of 2020, when people started getting sent back. Basically, people who requested asylum, the US government, under some obscure part of immigration law, said that they can send people to a safe third country where they can wait. So migrant protection protocols is what a lot of people call migrant persecution protocols. where somebody who shows up at the border to request asylum is told to go back to Mexico and wait for their day in court in the United States, basically. So, and the US government is trying to expand that. They've started also programs sending people back to Guatemala who are, say, from Honduras or El Salvador, and arrive to the United States. They make the entire perilous journey across Mexico, make it to the United States, ask for asylum, only to get sent back to Guatemala and told to wait there. And to, especially if they haven't applied for asylum in Guatemala, which is absurd because that region is so small and anybody fleeing from Honduras is going to be at risk in Guatemala as well.
So
Thank
let me
you,
just
Alex.
add a few things quick, Marco.
Sure. Sure.
So why are they doing this? You know, you heard about they doing this. Why are they doing this? Well, so when someone comes to this customs officer and says, I want to apply for asylum, first they could get rejected and say, come back another day, which means that they're not even getting their petition in to request asylum. If they do get accepted and they get sent back, how are they going to know when and where the court case is? How are they going to get updates? How are they going to submit their asylum application? So imagine right now I'm in New York. And the reason why I know this is because we are working with people on the border. Imagine everyone who has to go through the immigration court will get correspondence from the courts about when and where, etc. And if they send it to me and it's not at my correct address, it is not their fault. It is my fault for not being at that address. So how are they going to send those documents to people in the border when they're in shelters? They don't have a permanent address. They don't have a permanent home, which means that the government of the United States and these courts are not liable and responsible for those people not getting the information, and they are not getting it. So their asylum case is dead. So it is basically a very insidious and dark and horrifying way of rejecting thousands of people, not kids, mothers, fathers who are fleeing violence, right? So if you look at Nicaragua in the past, where it was just as poor, but it was safer. I'm not talking about now. I'm talking about a few months ago. No one was fleeing Nicaragua because it was safe. People were fleeing Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador because of violence. And anywhere that was better than there, even though they know that in the US they may still be facing death, at least they have a glimmer of hope. That's how bad it is. And the US is rejecting all of them. This is an evil administration, and I'm going to call it out. You can stop me if you want, Marco, but this evil and despicable. Marco, back to you.
Oh, please.
I just wanted
we
to.
agree. Yes, Salma.
I'm sorry I got disconnected, but also under that framework and within the context of these global crisis, global health pandemic, the US government is deporting people to Guatemala, to Honduras, and they're deporting them, and many of the people who are being deported have tested positive for COVID-19. So we're basically triggering another humanitarian crisis in countries that are already poor, that had poor health systems, poor justice systems, and this is just what Ravi mentioned. Is this administration has really very methodically and systematically created not only a humanitarian, but this is a very one of the worst human rights crises that our country has experienced in many decades, and the people who are being impacted right now is indigenous communities, indigenous diasporas that are migrating, and people who confront multiple systems of vulnerability, women that are traveling, children that are traveling under these terrible conditions, or that are in detention centers, or that are living on camps, or that are right now without any type of protections, to within this public health emergency and crisis and humanitarian crisis.
Terrible. Thank you for sharing, Alma. Thank you for helping the public understanding this different situations that immigrant workers and their families are going through. We have a couple of questions. We are having this special webcast on fighting for families, for international workers and families. Please help us sharing this conversation if you think it attention. I want to bring a comment from the public that says, I am worried about detainees with HIV positive or other chronic illnesses and transgender detainees and immigrants. Can you please share if any work is happening around this, Alex?
Sure. Yeah, I can share a little bit about what's been going on in Otay Mesa Detention Center. There have been quite a few people who are detained at Otay Mesa Detention Center who are transgender and who are also separately who are HIV positive. And there was actually a case very recently of a gentleman detained in Otay Mesa who's seeking asylum in the United States, who is HIV positive, and out of desperation to try to get freed, because he was worried about the, like Ravi said, 100% possibility of getting COVID-19, he actually went on a medication strike and stopped taking his retrovirals because he wanted to get the attention. He had actually been to a hearing with an immigration judge just a couple of weeks prior to when the pandemic got big, and they were talking about how this was going to be really important for him to be freed, and the judge denied bond for him, or denied him to be paroled out. And so luckily, through the work of his attorneys, he has, I think he was either freed yesterday, is going to be freed today. But it took a lot of work by a lot of organizations to be able to get that person out. And I know that there's a number of organizations working for the freedom of trans people. There's a trans person who went on hunger strike on multiple times at this point at Otay Mesa. Her name is Genesis, and actually some audio of her has been played on various media talking about what's going on, and she's been the victim of all kinds of retaliation by guards at Otay Mesa. And there is work being done to get people out. I would say that one of the some of the more successful efforts have been combinations of legal work and community organizing, where we've seen this in California at Mesa Verde, at Otay Mesa and Adelanto, where communities are coming together to organize, to speak out and call on elected officials to pay attention to what's going on, and at the same time lawyers going in and filing lawsuits, because at this point ICE is not inclined to listen. I completely agree with Ravi that in fact ICE does not care, and it's in fact one of their goals for more people to die, not just in the United States, but around the region. So it's taking a lot of effort to get people out, but there have been some examples of success, and we have to keep fighting for Genesis and Otay Mesa.
Thank you, Alex. Catherine Taktakin, Kathy, it's a pleasure to have you with us. She sends us a comment. She says there are over 70,000 Central Americans in Mexico now, those under the Remain in Mexico program, and those who have a court dates, as Ravi said, and also over 10,000 who were expelled after the border closure at the end of March. Many concerns for their situation as they have no work or means to support. I would like us to move, if possible, to a little bit more strategic perspective and try to talk about two things. What are your current campaigns? What are the work that you're doing? I want to take advantage of the fact that I feel very privileged and honored to have the three of you here, because you've been very innovative and amazing coalition builders. Pueblos Sin Fronteras created an amazing coalition throughout Central America, Mexico, and the US. Ravi has been a leader in the transnational, in the movement in general globally against detention and against deportation. And Alma has been leading an incredible transnational efforts at the border level. And so I believe that the three of you are one of the most amazing ones that can help us understanding what is it that we're missing, what are the steps that needs to be taken, what are the steps that your organizations and coalitions are taking currently, and how can people join your actions. Please, let's start with Ravi.
Thank you, Marco. I'll try to keep it short, but I expect to run on a little bit, so keep time for me, please.
No problem. You have 3 minutes.
So some of the things that Catherine just mentioned about people who have been sent back and all of that. One of the ways that I would suggest we can do there is if you have or know anyone who has been filed for asylum here and has been sent back, we would want to connect to them, because we can still check their cases here in the United States through various electronic means. And we will be able to keep in touch with them and make them aware of what is happening and support them through this, including helping them with their asylum application. New Sanctuary has a pro se clinic where we would help people with their asylum claims. Right now we are online and we can do this from anywhere in the world. So if you need that help, please reach out to us. We will gladly offer it. And if you want to help, you can also help, right? So you speak Spanish. We need Spanish speakers. We need interpreters who need to get involved. So that's it. That's one of the programs. We mentioned Freedom All. Everyone is focused on getting everyone out of detention. And fortunately, there was a good decision in Florida where the judge said they have to free as much people in Florida on those 3 detention centers. So we want to roll that out throughout the country to get them all removed. One of the things we are asking people to do is call your ICE office, find out why they are so inhumane, call your detention centers, find out why they are so inhumane, call the public officials around that detention centers to say that they are responsible for what is happening in that region. In fact, right now what we are doing is we are creating a training for people who are who live around certain airports. And so you can keep track of the movement from if they want to move detainees across the country or if they want to deport people. The goal is to be able to monitor what they're doing so that even as they lie, we know they lie, right? This whole administration lies. Do you all know that? Alex, do you know that this president lies? I don't know if you're aware of that. I'm just kidding. But we will be checking, we will be verifying a lot of those information in back end. But also, if we know there's a movement and we can track their flight, we can be ready there to meet the plane and to stop them at the destination. We have a lot more ways that we are offering services. Accompaniment, if you're internal in the US itself, what we have done is created groups that you can keep communicating with each other and communicate with us. So if something does happen, we will be able to respond, rapid response. But that should not only apply to New York, but we should be able to create those things around the border itself. So I offer whatever knowledge we have, and I offer whatever programs we have to anyone, both for help and those who want to help. Marco?
Thank you very much, Ravi. Perfect timing. Please, Alma, tell us, I know and we know that you are working on a petition, a letter that you are still collecting signatures to call on local and state officials across the border to act. Please tell us more about that.
Yes, I think, well, the letter was really in response to the humanitarian and human rights crisis that we're experiencing here. And just the fact that the federal government continued with so many attacks that it just became unsustainable for us to continue responding to everything the administration was doing, oftentimes 2-3 times a day, coming up with new attacks against our communities. So we thought it was important to appeal to local leaders for support in terms of protecting the lives of people who were in distress and who were extremely vulnerable right now under the COVID-19 pandemic. So what we did is we brought together groups, human rights organizations, grassroots groups, shelters on the Mexican side of the border and community leaders to draft a series of recommendations to local governments in terms of protecting the lives of migrants within the COVID-19 pandemic. The idea was primarily and immediately to save lives, to make sure that local governments knew our struggles, our concerns, but also for them to know that we were ready to coordinate with them to figure out the best ways for protecting migrant and refugee lives. So we came together, we issued a series of recommendations that were grounded on local expertise of the situation, and also who were informed by some of the international protocols for migrants in crisis that were developed at the United Nations level, and some recommendations also from the World Health Organization. So the letter was actually sent to pretty much all local cities on the US-Mexico border, to counties, and to border governors as well. Some cities have been very active. Some organizations have been very active in advocating at the city level to make sure that the local mayors and local city officials were actually following up on the recommendations. And I do want to give a shout out right now to the local organizations here in El Paso and to county leaders who actually passed a resolution asking the federal government to decongest detention centers. So there's been amazing work that has been happening, and for us, the letter was not really a letter, but it was rather a process of unity of organizations and groups and community members coming together to protect the dignity, the integrity, and the lives of our loved ones in our communities, and also of the frontline responders, from the people who are in providing emergency care to the people on the front lines at shelters, who are working with migrants, and we just needed to create a safer environment for them and develop local capacity for us to confront these crises. So that's pretty much what we're doing.
Thank you very much, Alma. We posted a link to the letter. Add your name, please. Add your signature. Help us promoting it. You can see it on the website that it's been posted, on the chat here and on Facebook. And Alex, please tell us, how can we support and how can we join the efforts to free them all, and particularly those right now in detention in Otay Mesa?
Yeah, thanks, Marco. Well, Pueblos Sin Fronteras, on the U.S. side of things, we've been focusing our efforts right now on Otay Mesa Detention Center. And that's partially because we have strong groups here in the Tijuana, San Diego region, and in Los Angeles that are a bit closer. And we've been working really closely with Otay Mesa Detention Resistance and American Friends Service Committee as well. And I'd really encourage people, especially in Southern California, to reach out to those two organizations. Pueblos Sin Fronteras, we've been focusing on reaching out to family members of people who are detained at Otay Mesa Detention Center. If you know anybody or in any of your advocacy work have come up or contacted by people who are currently detained at Otay Mesa Detention Center, or who have relatives who are detained there, please do reach out to us, to Pueblos Sin Fronteras, either on our Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, to continue organizing efforts there. And for one of the big needs that I think we're going to see, as like Ravi mentioned, in Florida, there was a decision by a judge to release people. Just yesterday, there was the announcement of the ACLU here in San Diego securing an order from a judge that at least 51 people and up to 60-something people need to be released immediately. And there's hopefully will continue to be decisions like that. But one of the real needs right now in response to that is going to be post-release support. So people who get out, and usually ICE just goes and they drop them off on the street in front of a McDonald's by the border. So there will very likely be a need for logistical support, care packages, transportation, and in the time of COVID-19, when people are getting released from a place where we know that they've 100% been exposed to the virus, that can be complicated. And Otay Mesa Detention Resistance has done a good job of leading the charge on that kind of humanitarian side of things. And so I'd encourage people to reach out to them. Keeping in mind that Pueblos Sin Fronteras is a transnational collective, we've also been, I'd like to mention, focusing advocacy efforts in Mexico on the Mexican immigration authorities so the Mexican immigration organization, the authority of the federal government, is run by a guy named Francisco Garduño, he's a prison administrator. So he comes from the world of incarceration, and he is now in charge of the equivalent of ICE, USCIS, and EOIR combined. It's kind of the one authority for immigration. And in response to COVID-19, at first he did nothing. And then when a lot of organizations, including Pueblos Sin Fronteras, called for people to be released, he put hundreds of people on buses, sent them to southern Mexico, and then just abandoned them on the side of a highway near the Guatemalan border with no official documentation, no health screening, no coordination with Guatemalan authorities. And it's been an unimaginably botched response that has put hundreds and hundreds of lives at risk. And we're calling for him to be removed from his post, because he has absolutely no business being in charge of this. The Instituto Nacional de Migración is what it's called, the National Migration Institute. And so we're doing that work here on the Mexican side as well.
Thank you very much, Alex. We have only 10 minutes left. We've been having an amazing, unique conversation with Alma Magitico from the National Network of Immigrant and Refugee Rights, and Alex Mensing from Pueblos Sin Fronteras, and Robbie Rakvir, leader from the New Century Coalition. I would like to take the last part of our conversation into trying to find one or two key points that can help us thinking. Throughout this 50 minutes, you've shown us and helped us understanding how there was a crisis already before on the immigration system that then was increased by the crisis of the epidemic of the pandemic. And so what's happening is that as a result, whether it's the crisis increases over the burden increases over immigrant communities, or there is a space for change or something that we can change and learn from this that we're going through right now. We are at the risk of seeing governments bailing out corporations and keeping migrants in detention. We're at the risk of governments, as you mentioned, Alex, taking the worst decision against immigrant communities and then taking the best decision on the interest of the 1%. What and how can we learn, and what are the keys to build a different world after the pandemic? What is the key, if you were to say one or two, that we need to keep in our minds, keep in our heads for the coming months ahead? Self-sustainability, is it a time? And anyway, Robbie, please. Don't be shy, and I'll keep track of your time. I know that I pressed a very big question, but.
I just say, let's look at the humanity of each and every one of us. It doesn't matter where you're from, what country, what language, what's your culture, what's your sexuality, what's your religion. Nothing matters but the humanity that we all have and that we all need to see in each other. And therefore, respect that, and everyone needs to live in dignity. So we want to help support that dignity that everyone is fighting for. Marco?
Thank you very much, Robbie. Please, Alex.
One of the things that I'd like to highlight is that I think that we've all been able to see how the US government has utilized this crisis as an excuse to harden the border and to pass all kinds of really extreme anti-immigrant measures under the guise of responding to COVID-19. There's been plenty of scientific evidence that shows that once the virus is already inside of a country, closing the borders does absolutely nothing to stop it. And so we see governments across the world closing their borders, saying it's because of COVID-19, when we know that that's not actually helping. I would encourage people to reflect on all of the excuses that governments use to discriminate against people, to close borders, to militarize borders, and to realize that all of those excuses are also false excuses, and that they're really only serving the interest of a corporate elite class and a corporate political class, where if we're closing the borders supposedly to protect jobs, that's also not true. If we're securing borders to prevent violence from coming to the United States from Central America or any other reasons, that's also not true. And so we can see that now with the COVID-19 crisis, and I hope people keep that in mind and call out the absurdity of all these other excuses.
Thank you very much, Alex. Please, Alma.
Yes. Well, I can think of two things right now that are very important. One is to build solidarity for all of those at home trying to figure out how they can help. I think it's very important for them to support those organizations and people on the ground that are responding to this crisis. And I think about all the workers, obviously, who, like I mentioned before, are keeping us alive, but I'm also thinking of all the workers in civil society organizations, humanitarian organizations, the people that are staffing comedores or food serving, food providing organizations that are feeding migrants, that are feeding people. So this is the time to support the organizations. This is the time to support our work, because basically what we're doing, we are coming on to take on the responsibilities of the state, which is to protect the integrity and the well-being of everyone in our community. And it is extremely challenging to be responding to so many crises, and on top of it, trying to figure out which foundation and which donor is gonna, help us and see if we can make ends meet. And so a big shout out also to all the migrants who are running shelters, who are supporting and protecting the lives also of the humanitarian workers, and that are protecting the lives and the well-being of those more vulnerable, like elders and children. And I've seen so many amazing acts of solidarity. Two, we need to organize. We need to start articulating a response as community members, as organizations that are grounded on protecting the lives, the dignity, and the human rights of everyone in our community. We cannot afford anything less than human rights for everybody, including the undocumented workers that are keeping us alive right now in all the essential jobs that are going on right now.
Thank you very much. What an irony. We call them essential workers, and at the same time, the reality is that they are disposable workers, as Ravi would say. Today, I've learned a lot from the work that you do and from your knowledge and your experience. Let me share with you. Allow me to share a little bit of that. I think that today we heard that this crisis and working against migration and turning our backs on migrant communities works always against any country and any community. The truth is that today in this crisis, we've seen how important these workers are, and yet we continue to mistreat them and put them in these terrible conditions. Everything that we're doing with migrants, it's gonna work against us. So now we can still see months ahead of suffering and pain, not only for migrants, but for all of us, if we don't start changing the equation and treating everyone as if they were our similar, our peer, our brother and sister, as our peer. So this crisis is an opportunity to continue accelerating the destruction of a civilization, of humankind, unfortunately, or it's an opportunity for us to learn how to live in a much more sustainable way in our bodies, in our land, and with the way that we treat others. If we don't learn from this, then we might be writing the history of a country that once was great, but its own selfishness and greediness turned it apart. So thank you very much. Global Exchange is happy to host this conversation, and the role that we want to play is just putting all of our resources to try to connect all of these voices together, walk with you, walk along the path of justice with you. And please stay tuned. Go to our website, globalexchange.org. And please, Alex, Ravi, Alma, as always, reach out to us, anything that we can do. And let's try to continue working together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco.
Thank you.